Thank you. Thank you very much. Albert Einstein's famous equation, a cornerstone for the understanding of the energy forms. Is there also a formula that describes the energy we need to live? Possibly. What do we need? Calories, yes. And there's something else, something important, something we will come back to. First of all, 2,500 kilocalories, or in other terms, 2.5 kilowatt hours. What could you fuel with it? Sure, you recall? This is about the amount of calories that you need as an average male adult to live for one day. Did you ever consider that about the same amount of energy is needed to give light for one day? When it comes to energy consumption, we are like a light bulb. What type of energy would you like to eat today? Theoretically speaking, you could derive the 2,500 kilocalories from 800 batteries. But that wouldn't be any very tasty, wouldn't it? So, luckily, evolution has given us a digestion system to extract the energy from food. We have learned to use fire. We have learned to prepare the food out of a variety of plant and animal-derived sources. We also learned how to preserve and how to transport food, which made us more independent from the location. So luckily, there is a tasty way how to get your calories from fruit, and actually 1,000 kilowatt hours are needed to run a human body for 1 year of life. As a carbohydrate source, one of the major calorie providers, saccharose, also known as sugar, is produced every year in the enormous amount of 160 million tons. The same amount was needed to build the Palm Island on Dubai. Yet, it takes 240 trillion liters of water, which happens to be 3 times the size of Lake Geneva, to produce our annual sugar quantity we consume. So certainly, when we make choices about our food, sustainability should be one of the factors to consider. Are we made out of sugar? Luckily not. Certainly when it rains, not a good idea to be made out of sugar. Luckily not, also because we have alternatives for delivering certainly the sweet taste to our palate. There are plant-derived ingredients already which are 100 times sweeter than sugar. Stevia is one example. Miracle fruit, maybe one of you have heard about the miracle fruit that turns sour into sweet. So quite some fascinating alternatives out there. Meat. The consumption of meat is still on a steep rise. Soon it could become a luxury. For the intense farming that is needed to produce the amount we eat in such a short time, the animals are not fed on grass anymore, they are fed on cereals. So today, already 57% of our annual cereal production we feed to the animals. At the same time, the conversion rate for calories in the case of meat is very poor. It takes more energy to produce 1 kilogram of meat than you get out of it when you consume it. So certainly, when we consider eating meat, there are some environmental footprints on our plate. Should we stop eating meat? No. But I would suggest that we start thinking about the reason why we consume meat. For calories, maybe not such a good idea. For taste, oh yes. There are certainly a lot of recipes that make food containing meat very, very delightful. And certainly, if we enjoy eating meat, we should give it back the value it deserves. So less, in the end, could be more. Fat, the third calorie provider. This is the energy density champion. If you compare the energy density of fat, actually it plays in the same ballpark as petrol. Interesting. Now, if you are on an expedition to the North Pole by foot, that is exactly the energy source you should choose. But most of us, we are not at the North Pole, at least not every day. So we need to rethink. The energy we derive from food is much more than calories. Constantly we see that the value we give to food is on a decline, which is unfortunate. The prices we pay for food in some industrialized countries are year by year decreasing. Moreover, we throw as much food away as we eat, and that is something we should certainly not tolerate, considering that we soon have 9 billion people living on our planet. Plus, our resources are not unlimited. So let's go back to our equation. And the energy, the value we get out of the food is more than calories. There's the pleasure as well. And there's the pleasure even in a factor of 2. So when we eat, what happens? There is certainly immediately a whole firework exploding that sends signals of emotion and pleasure through our senses to the brain. So let's look a little bit more at our 5 senses that are around our pleasure for eating. Sight. We eat with our eyes. The color we perceive already sends a signal of freshness and also could send a signal for liking to our brain. The quantity we see on our plate, unfortunately we are programmed to eat as much as we see. The digestive fluids, the production, the quantity they are produced is linked to the quantity we see on our plate. So something to consider. Hearing. When we eat food, acoustic signals are sent to the brain. When we chew, vibrations are generated that are picked up by the mechanoreceptors of the inner ear. And chewing a crispy bread sends a vibration pattern that is quite often interpreted as a freshness signal. Touch. We have the sensors for touch on our skin, on the outer skin, but also on the inner skin, like the inner mucosa of your mouth, the tongue, or the throat. Now the touch sensors, they pick up pressure signals, and they give us information about the shape and the surface of what is in our mouth. These trigeminal nerves, they also pick up the signals for pain, irritation, and temperature. So when we talk about food, the sense of irritation, which is created by the bubbles in a beer or in a champagne, could be quite delightful, couldn't it? Then when we talk about the temperature, there are some molecules that create a cooling effect, the menthol, which is typically perceived as quite pleasant and refreshing. The pungency of a hot chili. Well, if you take too much, it could turn into pain, but usually the quantities you consume, you can have quite some delight and pleasure getting out of these. Finally, let's come to the 2 senses for our flavor, the taste and the smell. First, the taste. The taste we perceive on our tongue. There we perceive sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami, with receptors that are dedicated to these 5 senses. We perceive them through taste buds. These taste buds, which have an onion-like shape, they sit on the tongue, in the upper epithelium of the tongue. And on the top, they have little openings, the taste pores. There you see little fibrils sticking out. These little fibrils, they come in contact with the food, which is dissolved in your saliva. And then these food constituents are picked up by the receptors, and the receptor cells, they fire some signals to the brain. Sweet, sour, bitter, salty, umami. All the other flavor aspects we perceive through the nose, not on the tongue. So let's look about the nose. In the nose, we have hundreds of different receptors for the smell. And they're located in the nasal epithelium in your nostrils, in that soft and wet membrane. And the receptor cells are connected to the olfactory bulb in the brain. And in the brain, the signals you perceive are then interpreted to distinguish certain smells, but also for the intensity or the liking. An immediate signal is fired, do you like the food or not? What is a smell? A smell is a mixture of small quantities of very volatile molecules, and they reach your nasal cavity, and they get up to the receptor cells where they're perceived. When we perceive the smell through breathing in, we call it the autonasal effect. This is what you experience when you can smell, for example, a fresh baked bread from a distance, or a coffee even before you see it. It already sends a signal to you whether you should go for it, whether you crave for it, or whether you're going to stay away from it. Now, another effect which is very important when we take the food in our mouth is the retronasal effect. Here, the food typically is on your tongue. The tongue moves it around. The teeth are chewing it and enlarge the surface nicely, so the flavor molecules can get out, can get released from the food matrix and go up through the back of your throat, up to the nasal cavity, into your nose. That is why you perceive the major proportion of the flavor of a food through your nose. Now when we swallow, this flavor push-up effect is even enhanced, because the tongue, when it closes the throat and pushes the food down, at the same time it pushes the air up and enhances the flavor. Some of the experiments around flavor release you can make yourself. The most simplest one, when you have a cold and your nose is blocked, there's not much fun eating. No nose, no fun. There are other experiences you can make. If you, for example, watch people in some cultures consuming liquid food, like soups, you tend to see quite often that they slurp their food. They suck in air when they consume the soup. Now, since we have learned how we perceive flavor in our nose and how important the airflow is, we can understand that this is actually a very, very good way to enhance the flavor perception in your nose. A second effect you can see with professional coffee and tea testers. When they have to distinguish the different qualities, they also tend to slurp, to suck in a lot of air when they test the samples. So be careful when you're trying it. It takes quite a lot of practice without choking. So the third experiment you can do or witness yourself is with wine drinking. Quite often you see people taking a sip of wine into their mouth and then shutting the mouth and blowing your cheeks to keep, first of all, the wine longer in your mouth, but also to push air up. Again, same reason, to get most of the excitement out of your food. So, all in all, we touched upon how fascinating and important the five senses are for our pleasure when we eat food. The science is still evolving a lot, and we only at the starting point of understanding how the different senses actually work together. Now, why not trying to give, through the five senses, through the understanding, the food back the value it deserves by much more driving the pleasure aspect? And why cannot we consume or make a first start of it by talking and considering in a much more passionate way the consumption and the making of bread, yogurt, sausages in the same passionate fashion as we talk today about wine? This could be one of the starting points to start not to throw food so much away. Secondly, science and technology certainly is constantly evolving. I was mentioning some of the hunts for new ingredients that can replace sugar, fat, or salt, but also there are strong advancements done in the area of understanding the flavor release much better and understanding the combination of the different senses. For example, there's indication that a loud sound will increase the liking for sweetness. That's quite surprising, isn't it? So how much more is there in the field of understanding how much touch and color and sound interacts with the flavor, with the taste and the smell of the food? The hospitality could be the overarching frame for it all. The conditions you set in a room where you consume your food, the light, the sound, the temperature, already sets the scene for the mindset you're in when consuming it. So at the same time, the chefs certainly do their very best to create the delight through all the other senses, the texture of the food, the smell, the taste. Why not combining it both? Would restaurants in the future maybe have an electronic system that changes the sensory setting of the room depending on the menu choice? Just a food for thought. Secondly, the appreciation of food, as we also heard previously, certainly is linked to the information we give around the food we consume. And we could imagine, why not, in the future having on the point of eating or ordering your food much more information available. Electronic media, to have the information at your fingertips, certainly the technology is there, and the mindset to embrace these technologies and for all of us to think about new ideas is just up to us. So finally, to come back to our equation, to our formula, there's much more than calories when it comes to the energy we derive from food. The pleasure has certainly a big impact of it, and the pleasure could be the driver to give back the food the value it deserves and to enable us to make more responsible choices when we eat food and make our pleasure in eating. Enjoy, and thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Birgit Schleifenbaum. Thank you, Birgit.